Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. We continue our active stretch of severe weather today into the weekend. The SPC has outlined an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 today for parts of Nebraska into northern Kansas, far southwest Iowa, with a broad slight risk extending all the way from North Dakota down into the southern plains, Oklahoma, and Texas, eastward into Arkansas and parts of Louisiana. So a broad severe risk today with the greatest threat expected to be within the enhanced risk area, although we could see several rounds and areas of severe storms develop within the broader slight risk area. We do have all hazards on the table for today. A large 5% area extends from central Nebraska eastward into southwest Iowa and then down southward along the dry line into parts of Kansas, western Oklahoma, northwest Texas. So the tornado threat is certainly on the table for today, but we do have the threat for large hail and damaging winds. Damaging winds is the reason for the enhanced risk upgrade for today, especially across parts of Nebraska, as we are expecting to see an MCS develop overnight, and that will foster a very significant wind threat with that activity. Large to very large hail possible with these storms all the way up and down the dry line from North Dakota southward into Texas. So a broad area of severe potential for today with all hazards, possibly some significant, on the table. Then we get into the next several days and we have multiple severe weather threats that are continuing to be outlined by the SPC. Tomorrow, Friday, now has a slight risk from the Great Lakes region southwestward into Texas. All hazards on the table for tomorrow: low-end tornado risk, damaging wind, and large to very large hail, particularly in that Arklatex vicinity down into north central Texas there. So tomorrow could be a potent day as well. And then we get into Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday have been the most banner days of this upcoming sequence, and the SPC certainly is upgrading probabilities as these outlooks come in, with the idea that this is going to be a potentially significant sequence of severe weather. This is the outline for Saturday. We have an enhanced risk from southern and eastern Kansas southward into much of Oklahoma and far north Texas, with a large slight risk surrounding that. All hazards are on the table. We don't have the tornado wind hail probabilities yet for the day 3 outlook, but we do have a significant severe weather risk area that has been outlined, specifically in the 30% red stippled area there. Wichita, Oklahoma City, Norman, Tulsa, Lawton, Ardmore, all under the gun for a significant severe weather threat on Saturday that could include the threat for all severe hazards, and that includes strong tornadoes, large to very large hail, and significant damaging winds. So Saturday is looking very, very potent and is continuing to look concerning for folks in those regions. And then the episode continues into Sunday. 30% risk area maintained for this day 4 to 8 outlook, and specifically the day 4 outlook, from southeast Missouri, northeast Arkansas, eastward into southern Illinois, Indiana, western Kentucky, and Tennessee, including places like Jackson, Nashville, Bowling Green, Louisville, Evansville, St. Louis, all under the gun for that enhanced risk on Sunday, which could include all severe hazards, some of which may be significant. So in this video, we're going to take a look at today's setup first, then we'll touch on tomorrow's setup, and then we're going to get into a little bit on Saturday and Sunday. Obviously, we don't know the specific details for Saturday and Sunday yet, as we're still getting some model agreement. Still increasing the model agreement with time here, and we're going to have to see how the next couple days play out to get a real good idea of Saturday and Sunday. But the bottom line is that Saturday and Sunday are looking like a potential severe weather outbreak across portions of the southern plains eastward into the Ohio River Valley region. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. We'll start off with today's setup. First, let's take a look at what's going on as we speak. Recording this just after 8 a.m. Central Daylight Time here in Norman, and we have a couple of complexes ongoing. Big ol' MCS here across parts of Arkansas that will continue to move off to the east and not really be a factor in our severe weather threat later on today. But we do also have a cluster of severe storms, including some supercellular activity here across west central to central Texas. This is expected to continue through much of the morning and afternoon hours today as it moves off to the east, perhaps increasing in coverage here, growing upscale somewhat, perhaps some semi-discrete activity maintained with this activity. But we just don't know exactly how this is going to evolve. And this is being fueled by a little bit of a shortwave trough aloft. We'll take a look at the mesoanalysis data here in a second, but this activity is going to have a big impact on the severe weather threat, especially across parts of North Texas into Oklahoma and western Kansas, as we're going to have some impacts in the overall thermodynamic fields from this morning activity. And as we said, it's expected to continue into the late morning and early afternoon hours today across this region of central to east central Texas. So we're going to have to watch this as we go into the afternoon. This could become a pretty robust severe threat associated with it as well. But for now, we just don't exactly know how it's going to evolve going into the next several hours. And that is going to have big impacts on the afternoon severe threat, the main round of severe storms with today's setup. So let's go ahead and take a look at some mesoanalysis data here. This is the 500 millibar map at the present time. A few little things to note here on the map. A little bit of a trough here across eastern Canada down into the northeast United States, Great Lakes region. Trough back here across the northwestern portion of the country. That is going to be of concern or of usefulness in our severe weather setup today across the northern portion of the risk area, that enhanced risk up there in Nebraska. We also have a little bit of a shortwave, and actually several shortwaves rotating through the flow down here across the southern portion of the country. You can see several little ripples in the flow here across the southern U.S. A little bit of a jet streak here as well, 40 to 50 knots or so of flow centered across Texas right now. These little shortwaves are going to rotate through the flow, and this one here across Oklahoma and North Texas is going to be why we're having some severe weather activity this morning across central Texas. That is fueling that complex of storms down in central Texas. We go down to 700 millibars. You can see it even a little bit better here. A little bit of a shortwave down in here across Texas into the Oklahoma vicinity. Just really several different little waves in here helping to initiate this activity, keep it going. This one here across Oklahoma probably helping to keep this Arkansas activity going. This one down here across Texas perhaps allowing for the persistence of these storms across the central portion of the state. Then we have several back in here, little ripples in the flow that are going to rotate through into the southern plains by this evening, and that is going to help kick off our second round of severe storms, especially across southern portions of the risk area. Again, our northern shortwave is going to be our main factor for that northern portion of the risk area of the enhanced risk up there in Nebraska. So a very complex setup, mostly zonal flow here across the U.S., but still these little shortwaves are going to be enough to rotate through the flow and help initiate some areas of severe weather activity later on this afternoon. Down at the surface, as you might expect with the strongest trough here across the northwest U.S., we've had surface low development out ahead of it. Eastern Wyoming here, you can see the center of the surface low right there, and that is expected to deepen a little bit as we go into the day today. As that flow continues to traverse the Rockies aloft, we should see some intensification of the surface low and some impacts down here into the southern plains. We should see a nice dry line develop here leading up into the surface low, helping, and that will be our initiating boundary for severe storms today from Texas northward into Kansas. 850 millibar flow here, low-level jet. We do have a plume of low-level jet here from South Dakota southward into West Texas. That is expected to continue given the continuation or intensification of our low-level cyclone here through the day as that trough aloft swings through. But we'll probably see somewhat of a waning period with the low-level jet going into the afternoon. So we won't have terribly strong low-level flow, but we will have enough to support supercellular activity and some tornado threat with any storms that do develop, although the low-level shear will not be on the stronger side given somewhat of a waning of the low-level jet going into the afternoon hours. But at least we do have some low-level jet in place today from South Dakota to West Texas, and we'll see how that evolves going into the afternoon. Let's take a look at some raw surface data here. This is our southern plains sector. You can see where our 60s dew points are at the moment here. 60s dew points up to basically the Kansas-Oklahoma border, maybe just south of there, and out westward into the Texas Panhandle. Then you go southward into far southeast New Mexico and down into West Texas. So broad plume of rich moisture here out across these regions, and that is going to help foster a very broad warm sector for today's severe weather threat. Now again, we do have that ongoing thunderstorm activity here across central Texas. That is going to have impacts on the overall the thermodynamics here in the vicinity of these storms, especially across North Texas and Oklahoma. The outflow from this convection may shoot off here to the north and kind of cool surface temperatures, scour out a little bit of the moisture, but around the western rim of that outflow, we should see recovery here going into northwest Texas and western Oklahoma to possibly warrant some severe thunderstorm development later on this afternoon. Farther north into Kansas, let me switch sectors here real quick and show you that we don't really have our moisture in place yet across these regions. We only have 50 dew points here across much of southern Nebraska into Kansas. We are going to get those 60s dew points up to the north, but it is going to be somewhat of a just-in-time moisture type setup here, where the main richest moisture doesn't quite make it into our target area until right before the event is slated to begin. So probably storms are going to go, as we're going to see, still have these 50s dew points hanging around. The farther north you go, obviously the lower the moisture quality here, but we will see pretty rapid advection of moisture northward as that low-level cyclone develops and intensifies there across that Wyoming, the Central High Plains region today. So we will get those dew points up there eventually, but they probably will be just in time, especially with areas farther north here into parts of Nebraska. But down here across the Oklahoma-Texas corridor, we already have pretty robust moisture in place. You can see there 70s dew points all the way up to the Wichita Falls area there in northwest Texas, upper 60s there in southwest Oklahoma City there at 66. So plenty of moisture already. We'll have to wait and see and monitor how that ongoing convection across central Texas will impact the low-level moisture fields today. But we should have some recovery and some maintenance of higher dew points here across northwest Texas into western Oklahoma to foster an all-hazard severe threat there with any storms that develop. Some soundings here for you today. This is the Norman sounding at 12Z from just an hour or so ago. A couple things to note. We do have some elevated instability at this point, 1,700 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Somewhat deep moisture here extending up above 850 millibars with some drier air aloft thanks to the elevated mixed layer. You can see that layer of very steep lapse rates there up above 850 millibars. That is our elevated mixed layer, that layer of warm, dry, well-mixed air that emanates from the desert southwest, western Mexico, and gets transported out to the east across atop the moist layer to allow for instability to build going into the afternoon hours today. So that EML is going to be pretty strong today, and we probably we'll see a hold off in the erosion of the cap. If we look at our satellite data here, we notice we do have quite a bit of cloud cover across the region this morning from central Oklahoma, southern Oklahoma, southward into Texas. We're going to have to monitor how this erodes through the day. We do have some pockets clearing here across northwest Texas. Up to the north, Kansas looking pretty clear with the advection of moisture. However, we may see the advection of low clouds as well into Kansas. We're going to have to monitor that. That's kind of an unknown at this point. But we do have quite a bit of cloud cover here across parts of Texas and Oklahoma. So we're going to have to watch that. I do think we will see some erosion of the cloud cover here across these regions, especially with westward and southwestward extent there across northwest Texas into southwest Oklahoma. And that will probably be our favored corridor for storm initiation today in that area. Farther to the north, we'll have to watch how those clouds maintain themselves or continue to advect northward, as that could put a little bit of a concern as far as full destabilization up here farther to the north. But right now we are pretty clear, but those clouds, as you can see, are advancing a little bit farther to the north with the ongoing moisture advection. So assuming we can get some breaks in the clouds, they might hold off a little bit until mid to late afternoon if this cloud cover stays around, but we should eventually see full erosion of the cap through a combination of processes such as the surface heating and the incoming trough, which should help lift and cool this capping inversion a little bit to allow for storm initiation by mid to late afternoon in this regime. Deep layer shear, not quite all that strong yet. 30 knots or so of effective bulk shear. Not a lot of low-level shear at this point. A little bit of a chaotic wind profile for now at Oklahoma City or at Norman, but that should change going into the afternoon today, especially areas out west in that low-level jet plume. We should see a little bit of photograph curvature develop across these regions, supporting that some tornado risk with any supercells that can develop. And deep layer shear will intensify later on for a large to very large hail threat with any supercells that develop, given strong instability and at least initially fairly weak low-level shear. Down into Dallas-Fort Worth, much of the same there, a little bit of a capping inversion on the atmosphere, fairly deep moisture beneath somewhat drier air aloft, and a similar wind profile to Norman with a little bit stronger shear here, 60 knots of bulk shear. It's interesting that we have such a change there from not that far of a spatial difference, but that is because of that influence of a little bit stronger flow aloft here, 500 millibar flow, 40 to 50 knots across this region, drops off drastically as you go to the north. So a little bit stronger deep layer shear to the south there, and that is that will continue into the afternoon and foster that threat for supercells, especially across the western rim of any convective outflow from the morning convection there. Farther to the north, not much to see at this point. We're well to the north of the moisture here. Lots of dry air aloft. Again, that should change as that low-level moisture surges northward, but not much to see right now. This is going to be your upstream environment, which is favorable for severe storms, and that is going to be translating northward as the moisture translates northward ahead of the northern shortwave trough. All right, let's take a look now at some model data here. This is the 6Z NAM, 12Z NAM, not quite out yet. Recording this a little bit earlier this morning as we have to get on the road to get out to our target area today. So this is 500 millibars, the 6Z NAM here for today. And as you can see, as we go through the day today, we're going to see both of these little shortwave troughs. The one here, a little bit of a kink in the height contours across the desert southwest, and this main one up here across the kind of the Intermountain West and northward into Idaho and Wyoming. That is going to shift east today, and we should see a continuation, a couple of different favorite areas for convective initiation in these environments. Now, you'll notice here that areas farther to the north, here across, especially across parts of the enhanced risk area, a little bit farther removed from the actual trough. So your shortwave is right in here, axis of the trough right in here. Stronger flow starting to impinge upon the Dakotas, but down here across Nebraska, not much going on here until later on in the evening. So you can see here finally the shortwave does kind of move its way in. This is just after midnight Central Daylight Time that shortwave does finally start to move in. We probably will see some isolated supercell development up here during the day across these areas, but we will see convective coverage increase as we go into the evening and nighttime hours as that shortwave enforcing finally moves in. So MCS probably will take shape going into the evening to nighttime hours tonight, and that is what really the enhanced risk is for, the significant wind risk with any MCS that does develop. But we could see isolated development out ahead of the shortwave. We do have enough forcing there out ahead of the shortwave along the northward advancing moisture pool along the warm front there in the Dakotas. That could be a favored area for storm initiation during the day, and then that, again, convective coverage is expected to increase going into the nighttime hours tonight. So going back down to our southern risk area today, we see that little shortwave here moving across the region. That is initiating those storms across central Texas. That will move off to the east, perhaps a little bit of subsidence behind it. Behind these little shortwaves, you tend to have sinking motion or subsidence, which tends to suppress convective initiation in these kind of situations. But we do have a little bit of a wave back in here, impinging upon northwest Texas, western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas into the late afternoon to early evening hours that should help overcome any subsidence there from the morning shortwave. So we go down to 700 millibars, and we can see those shortwaves pretty a little bit better. So here we go into today. This is this morning. You can see that shortwave moving into the north there by early evening to the nighttime hours there, and then down to the south, we have a nice little shortwave developing there by 0Z. Nice little kink in the height contours there with this shortwave extending probably all the way back in here, helping to initiate storms down there in the southern portion of the risk area. Down at the surface, let's take a look at our surface low development here. You can see that surface low up across Wyoming into western South Dakota, going to intensify somewhat during the day. Broad surface cyclone here by 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We do see perhaps some consolidation of the surface low center across eastern Colorado, a little bit closer to our southern plains portion of the risk area there. So that could help a little bit initiate storms there across parts of Kansas into Oklahoma and Texas with surface flow nicely backed and convergence along the dry line. So that is an interesting development there. Continues on into the evening hours, and then the cold front will kind of push off to the east with our main surface low center up to the north. Cold front down here, that should allow for some convective coverage to increase across these areas, and that will continue east into tomorrow and will be our main initiating boundary for tomorrow's convection on Friday. Looking at our moisture, let's take a look at the Central Plains sector first to show you how this moisture is going to advect in. So as we talked about, first we'll show you where things are right now. So the NAM has it at prog like this, those 60s dew points up here, a little bit farther north than what the NAM was progging here up into the northern part of Oklahoma. So those are going to continue to make their way northward going into the day today, but you do see that kind of hole in the dew points here across central Texas. This is maybe a little bit farther north than what it should be. Maybe it's going to be down in here, given the current position of thunderstorm activity across Texas, but that hole is going to be a little bit of an issue here across these areas, especially if it advects northward along the dry line. That could be a little bit of an issue. You can see there, the dew points crater there into the 50s just ahead of the dry line. That is going to be of concern. That will really decrease the potency of the thermodynamics here across the areas impacted by the morning convection. And again, this is just a model output. We're going to have to watch the actual OBS to see how the low-level moisture fields and the thermodynamic fields are impacted by this morning convection across Texas, but the NAM at least shows that advecting up into southwest Oklahoma, northwest Texas, and that could be of concern in negating the severe threat across this area. Farther to the north, we're a little bit more unsullied by convection here across parts of northern Oklahoma, southern Kansas. The 70s dew points are making their way up there pretty quickly across that area by early evening, late afternoon to early evening. And so we should have a chance of seeing convective development out here across southern Kansas to northwest Oklahoma ahead of what appears to be a little bit of a dryline bulge out there across southwest Kansas. So complicated evolution to today's setup, all kind of putting a wrench in it is this convection across Texas this morning. Going to have to really watch that like a hawk with how this activity impacts the thermodynamics across the areas farther to the north. But let's try to take some soundings here from across the region. This is going to be at 0Z. So we'll take one here just ahead of the dryline bulge there, southwest to southern Kansas into northwest Oklahoma. And I'll show you a sounding here from southwest Oklahoma to see how that morning convection will impact the environment. So up here to the north across Kansas, very impressive looking profiles here. A little bit of a capping inversion across Kansas. 74-degree temperature there at this sounding location. Again, we know the NAM has its cool bias, but that could be of a little bit being impacted by cloud cover here. We talked about we're going to have to watch this cloud cover as it advects northward and how it maintains itself through the day across these areas. If we see cloud cover stick around anywhere, those temperatures are going to remain pretty cool, and therefore we will probably see a little bit less severe threat in those areas where cloud cover persists. But assuming we have full destabilization, this is a pretty robust profile. 3,800 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, 74/69 at the surface, with a bit of a moist layer beneath that nice elevated mixed layer there aloft. So pretty much a classic looking plains profile there for significant severe weather. Our photographs look very nice as well. About 40 knots of effective bulk shear, plenty for supercells, and some nice turning there in the low levels of the photograph. Low level jet maintaining itself at about 30-35 knots there. Nice veering and strengthening of the winds with height, leading to some strong photograph curvature there in the lowest levels, upwards of 230 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. So all in all, that should favor an all hazards threat, assuming supercells can get going in this environment. A little bit conditional today, but if and when supercells get going and where they get going, they will have an all hazards threat. Initially some large to very large hail, along with some tornado threat persisting into the early evening as that low level jet kind of maintains itself and perhaps increases as we go into the evening hours tonight. Now you can see the impacts from the morning convection across southwest Oklahoma. This was right in the middle of that little dew point hole there. And you can see what's happened. Very much a decrease in the overall thermodynamic profile here. Not all that favorable for significant severe weather. Severe weather at all, given some drier low levels and very limited instability here from the convective outflow in the morning. So that is something to watch for sure. Southwest Oklahoma into northwest Texas. If we get convective outflow to really surge farther to the northwest, ahead of the dry line, we could see some issues there. Let's take a sounding here, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time ahead of the dry line there, southwest Oklahoma, to see what the environment is like before that convective outflow makes its way up there. Very strong instability, 5,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Strong low-level instability, 89/72, with long photographs favorable for supercells. Not all that much low-level shear, though. I suspect that will be because the low-level jet will be stronger farther to the north, closer to the developing surface low. And we can see that here. Going into the evening, we see a little bit farther off to the north is our favored area for our low-level jet there across southern Kansas. So very interesting here. We're going to have to watch how that plays out. But if storms can get going here and we don't have as much influence from the morning convection and the outflow from the morning convection, then that northwest Texas, southwest Oklahoma corridor would be a favored area for storm initiation, probably mostly a large hail to damaging wind threat, with the tornado threat on the lower side, given a little bit less low-level shear. Just want to take a look at another model here. Let's take a look at the RAP model to see if it also depicts robust impacts from the morning activity in Texas, and it does not. You can see here the rapid transport northward of the moisture with very limited impacts here from the morning convection across Texas. Very tight dry line here across the Texas-Oklahoma border region down to the south. And so very limited impacts here across this area from the morning convection. And you can see here as we take a sounding that environment, this will be at 0Z, so 7 p.m., certainly favorable for severe weather. Robust instability, a little bit of capping there across that area, but that could be just a model thing. Long hodographs, fairly straight hodographs here, so this is on board with the NAM. Fairly limited low-level shear, strong deep layer shear for supercells with possibly a large hail and damaging wind risk. Tornado risk should remain low there, given a little bit weaker low-level shear. Farther to the north here on the RAP model, across southern Kansas, let's take a look at the profiles there. And so certainly the NAM and the RAP are on board with each other. Strong instability across the entirety of the dry line down here, but much stronger low-level shear here in southern Kansas, given a little bit stronger low-level jet, a little bit stronger veering and strengthening of the winds with height. So very interesting. If there was going to be a tornado threat here today, I would suspect it's going to be a little bit better up here across southern Kansas, northwest Oklahoma, ahead of the dry line, with a little bit stronger low-level shear with northward extent. Let's take a look quickly at the areas to the north across this region. You can see that moisture, just-in-time moisture for sure. Those 60s dew points barely make it to the Kansas and Nebraska border by 4 p.m., making their way northward by 7 p.m. Probably some MCS development underway as the first influences from the shortwave trough make their presence felt here. For areas to the north, that activity will shift down to the southeast with time and conglomerate into an MCS. We'll take a sounding out here across southern Nebraska, where we do have a 5% tornado risk out here. But let's see what we're looking at. And somewhat of a similar profile to down south. Plenty of instability with some low-level shear favorable for a tornado or two. But storm mode should congeal pretty quickly into an MCS, pushing off to the southeast with more of a damaging wind risk going into the evening and nighttime hours tonight. Let's take a look at some convective allowing models today. This is the 12Z HRRR. So let's see how it handles this morning convection across Texas. So it actually kind of dissipates it, and then we have just additional development throughout the day, morphing into some supercells here by 5 p.m. This is 5 p.m. With supercells impacting the I-35 corridor, probably the Waco to Austin area. I would suspect, given the current position of that activity, and the HRRR agrees with that. We do see some scattered development along the dry line here across western Oklahoma, perhaps some across northwest Texas, not really all that persistent, and that may be due to outflow impacts from earlier convection. Let's take a sounding here out ahead of this northwest Texas blip to see if the HRRR has been impacted by that MCS, the morning activity in Texas. Not really. Plenty of instability, 91/72, so the thermos have not been impacted by morning convection, but the wind profile certainly not all that favorable for tornadic activity. If we look at our northern sector here, we'll see what happens here across the northern portion of the risk area. Not much activity across Texas here today. Just really, the HRRR is really liking that western Oklahoma corridor. Not much activity here to the north. Lots of activity here to the north across Nebraska and the Dakotas. Quickly morphing into an MCS given subpar moisture quality. And as it moves into better moisture, more of a robust MCS develops with damaging wind and some embedded tornado risk up there. So we do have some additional supercells developing here across central Oklahoma, perhaps impacting the OKC metro by midnight or so. That is an interesting development there, but we'll have to watch that. And remember, this is just one model. Our other model's not quite in yet, but we can take a look at some from last night. This is the 6Z 3-kilometer NAM here. And you can see that is pretty interesting. If we go down to our southern plains sector here, you will see that outflow from the morning convection. You can see those fine lines kind of shifting off to the north there. This is at 12Z. Obviously, that has not occurred yet. This is a pretty poor depiction of the overall current state of convective activity in Texas, but nonetheless, that is kind of the idea. This activity across Texas could shoot an outflow boundary north and south and kind of impact the activity, impact the parameters here across Texas and Oklahoma for later on. You can see the NAM 3K does have quite a bit of dryline development out here across the far eastern Texas panhandle into southwest Kansas. Moving off to the east, pretty robust activity there across these regions. And then areas farther to the north across the central plains, much of the same. You see here the NAM does have quite a bit of supercell activity here across Nebraska into western Kansas. Again, subpar moisture the farther north you go, and then the MCS kind of takes over going into the nighttime hours tonight, moving across mostly Nebraska into eventually Iowa and Missouri. So that's what's going on with today's setup here. All in all, a very complex setup. We're going to have to watch how the low-level moisture fields and thermos fields are going to be impacted by this morning convection across Texas. and that will have a drastic effect on whether or not we see storm development, robust storm development here, especially across northwest Texas and western Oklahoma. Let's go into tomorrow a little bit. Just want to take a brief look at tomorrow. So I'll zoom back out here to the CONUS sector. So tomorrow here, this is going to start this evening, 500 millibars here on the 6Z NAM. We go through, that shortwave moves off into the northern plains and Midwest. And then we just have broad zonal flow out here across much of the southern half of the U.S. So not a ton of little shortwaves rotating through the flow. We're going to have to rely on our cold frontal boundary from our surface low to really initiate storms in this environment. We should have an unstable environment out ahead of the cold front, and any little perturbations will certainly help initiate storms in this environment. If we go down to 700 millibars, let's see if we see anything. Maybe a little bit of a shortwave developing out here across the southern portions, so the Midwest down into the southern plains there, but mostly quiescent as far as the pattern goes here for tomorrow. That's why any activity will be sporadic along the cold front with mostly a large hail and damaging wind risk. Let's see our moisture here. Just take a couple soundings. You can see where that cold front is going to be. That cold front pushes off to the east. Kind of stagnates there across the southern plains, but we will have the opportunity for activity out ahead of the cold front tomorrow. Midwest, we'll take one down here across northern Texas. Could be another corridor for storm activity tomorrow. So up here to the north, you can see, given a limited low-level response, not going to be much in the way of low-level shear for a tornado threat, but certainly plenty of instability for a large hail and possibly a damaging wind threat with storms in the Midwest. Down to the south, strong instability as well, 4,800 joules per kilogram mixed layer Cape there in North Texas, but long, straight photographs favoring that significant hail and damaging wind risk there. So that is tomorrow, and then we get into Saturday. Saturday and Sunday, once again, are going to be our favored days for a potentially significant severe weather episode, possibly a severe weather outbreak, including the threat for all severe hazards, tornadoes, some of which could be strong, large to very large hail, and significant damaging winds. So in the sake of time here, just going to look at the NAM. We're not going to do our comparisons here, just in the sake of time. But here for Saturday, let's see, you can see what happens out here with the 500 millibar flow. We have this nice little shortwave that is developing out here across the desert southwest, west coast region. That is going to rotate its way eastward as we go into Saturday. That's going to make its way nicely across Oklahoma. In particular, you can see the height contours there, the bowing of the height contours there with this little jet streak starting to impinge upon Oklahoma. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time on Saturday. So by afternoon on Saturday, we'll have forcing ahead of this shortwave, very low amplitude shortwave, nice westerly flow aloft. Right away, that is sounding the alarm bells for me, because we should have a nice moisture plume ahead of the dry line that is oriented fairly north-south. With as this trough makes its way across the Rockies, we'll have surface low development somewhere in here. And the dry line will be fairly north-south, so with shear vectors that are likely to be more perpendicular to the initiating boundary, given more westerly mid and upper level flow, that should allow for a very discrete storm mode with this activity on Saturday. And in this environment, you'll see here in a second, that could favor all significant severe hazards. So that trough makes its way eastward into the southern plains by afternoon on Saturday. Very low amplitude trough with nice westerly flow aloft. Down at the surface, you can see here what happens. This is Friday evening, and you'll see as that trough makes its way eastward across the Rockies, nice surface low development there across eastern Colorado, with warm temperatures here across Oklahoma into perhaps Kansas. Really, this looks like an Oklahoma deal to me, just given the positioning of the trough and the surface low here, and you'll see our moisture, very favorable looking moisture plume here ahead of the dry line. And this is at 4 p.m., 7 p.m., and that is about as textbook as it gets. A little bit of a dry line bulge there across northwest Oklahoma. Large plume of 70s, even mid-70s dew points out here across Oklahoma eastward. Southern Kansas, Oklahoma, North Texas. That is going to be our main region for severe weather here. Ahead of that developing surface low in eastern Colorado, and a very tight dry line out here with the dry line bulge, particularly in this model run across northwest Oklahoma. And you'll see here, you would suspect with that such a strong surface low and developing low-level cyclone that our low-level jet would be strong, and you would be correct. We'll maintain 30 to 40 knots through the day, but by evening, that will start to increase rapidly across Oklahoma, Kansas, and North Texas. We go from probably 30 to 40 knots here across the area through much of the day, certainly plenty to support an all-hazards threat, and then we're probably going to ramp up that significant severe threat going into the evening, early evening hours, as we get our low-level jet to really ramp up 60 to 70 plus knots there across the eastern half of Oklahoma into southeast Kansas. So our profile should really rapidly increase here by early evening across these areas. Let's take a sounding here, northwest Oklahoma. This is at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time on Sunday. And this should be a pretty potent look here, I would suspect, out here. And that is a pretty potent look. Very strong instability, 5,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, 88 over 72 at the surface. Very rich low-level moisture with robust instability, to say the least, with a nice-looking hodograph. Some curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph. Strong, deep layer shear for supercells would be favorable for all hazards. And then we get into the evening hours. I'll take a sounding here, northeast Oklahoma, and you'll see that we'll have a drastic increase in the low-level shear here within that low-level jet. So any discrete supercells maintaining themselves into this environment will continue to feel the impacts of robust instability and rapidly strengthening low-level shear. Hodographs really enlarged there by early evening, upwards of 400 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative felicity, favorable for significant long track tornadoes there. So Saturday is certainly has trended upward in the last couple of days. We were initially concerned about some capping here, but we should have plenty of forcing given the beautifully timed arrival of this shortwave overspreading the dry line there by mid to late afternoon on Saturday. That should foster plenty of forcing for isolated discrete supercells along the dry line with very favorable shear vector orientation with respect to the initiating boundary. So your dry line here across these areas, fairly north-south, and then your shear vectors beautifully off, almost purely perpendicular to the dry line. So that should foster a discrete mode, and Saturday certainly has my attention as a significant severe weather day, especially for parts of Oklahoma into southern Kansas. So let's back this out and look at Sunday here. Sunday also looks to be pretty potent. We'll switch over to the GFS as the NAM 6Z NAM isn't quite out yet for Sunday. But here you go on the GFS. That shortwave moves off to the east, and out ahead of that on Sunday, we'll see kind of a redevelopment of a shortwave back in here across the Central Plains, and then going into afternoon on Sunday, that shortwave moves nicely into the Midwest and Ohio River Valley region. Out ahead of that will be a favored corridor for robust severe weather as well. We maintain this very low amplitude westerly flow aloft, and that always sounds the alarm bells for me, as that those shear vectors once again are often very favorably oriented with respect to the initiating boundary. So robust moisture here across these regions. 70s dew points out here ahead of the dry line surface boundaries here. Our surface low up there in Illinois, in the Illinois-Missouri region, and out ahead of that we should have a favorable environment for all severe hazards, including some significant severe hazards there. And certainly the GFS shows that. Plenty of instability maintaining itself into Sunday across these regions, with plenty of curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph. Strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height, favoring that all hazards threat, including the threat for strong tornadoes and significant damaging winds. So that is what things are looking like for now. We're going to come back with more videos as needed on these setups, especially for Saturday and Sunday. But that is what's going on for today through the weekend. Today's setup, once again, could be a potent one, somewhat conditional at this point, and we'll have to watch the impacts of morning convection across Texas. But overall, the SPC has a slight risk extending down from North Dakota into central Texas, with that enhanced risk there across Nebraska for that overnight MCS that is expected to develop and move across the area, producing some significant wind gusts there in the orange shaded region. But elsewhere, kind of sporadic, scattered supercell activity where we can get the strongest destabilization and are away from any impacts of morning convection, and that is most prevalent there in northwest Texas and western Oklahoma. All hazards on the table for today. 5% tornado risk there from Nebraska southward along the dry line into northwest Texas. Again, I think the greatest tornado threat for any isolated supercells will be anything that forms here in southwest Kansas, southwest to southern Kansas, as the low-level jet is a little bit stronger with northward extent, given closer proximity to the developing low-level cyclone. Large hail going to be a risk with any supercell that forms along the dry line today, and damaging winds are also going to be a risk, particularly with that MCS overnight as it moves across Nebraska into southwest Iowa and northwest Missouri. Day 2, tomorrow, just a broad slight risk there from the Midwest Great Lakes region down to the southwest into northeast Texas. Not expecting to be a super robust and severe threat there. We'll have to watch any outflow from morning convection as any potential areas of higher tornado potential or higher supercell development, higher chances for supercell development. But we should see scattered activity along the cold front here, with mostly a large hail and damaging wind risk. Large hail is going to be greatest there in the northeast Texas corridor, but damaging winds and maybe a tornado or two across the entirety of that cold front there tomorrow. Then we ramp things up for Saturday and Sunday. That is looking like the banner stretch of this sequence. SPC has the enhanced risk out there for southern Kansas, southern and eastern Kansas, down into much of Oklahoma and far north Texas for Saturday. All severe hazards are on the table with a what looks like a very discrete, isolated storm mode with very strong low-level shear strengthening into the early evening hours there. So significant tornadoes, strong damaging winds, and large hail are all on the table for Saturday. That could be the first day of a 2-day severe weather outbreak sequence. Then we go into Sunday. That severe threat continues with that low-amplitude shortwave moving off to the east. Robust moisture out ahead of it could foster that significant all-hazards threat there, especially from southeast Missouri, northeast Arkansas, eastward into the Ohio River Valley region. So that's going to do it for now. Again, I'll be back as needed with discussions as these, particularly the Saturday-Sunday setup approaches. We'll know a little bit more over the next day or so about how Saturday and Sunday are expected to evolve. But for now, it is looking like a pretty potent couple of days there across from the Southern Plains eastward. And so folks in these areas, from anywhere in these areas from today through the weekend, definitely pay attention to those forecasts and keep your sources of local weather information, the NWS, the SPC, your local news meteorologists, keep those at handy for the latest on the changing conditions as far as severe weather goes today through the weekend. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.